Buenas noches a todas y a todos, bienvenidos a este espacio de conversación que tenemos alrededor del programa Monographs. Este es un programa comisionado por el archivo del Asian Film Archive. Es una serie de videoensayos concebidos como una plataforma para discutir acerca de la imagen y movimiento en el contexto asiático. Todas las obras que hacen parte de este programa están originadas como respuesta a la incertidumbre de la pandemia y creadas durante varios estados de aislamiento y soledad. Estas diversas obras recurren a historias, archivos, relevando nuevas visiones de cuestionamientos, reflexiones que evidencian las profundas conexiones de los realizadores con la sociedad, el cine y el set. Este programa es organizado, como lo dije, por el archivo de cine asiático. Este archivo fue fundado en el 2005 como una organización sin ánimo de lucro para preservar, explorar y compartir el arte del cine asiático, desde la conservación y la restauración hasta la exhibición y la educación. El archivo de cine asiático aspira a ser un centro para la comunidad cinematográfica asiática, contribuyendo a la cultura, la educación y la industria. Este archivo hace parte de la Federación Internacional de Archivos Fílmicos, al igual que la Cinemateca de Bogotá, de la FIAF. Y bueno, estamos muy contentos de que estén compartiendo con nosotros y nuestros invitados de hoy. A continuación voy a presentar. Welcome to our guests today. I'm going to present each of our guests before starting the conversation. Viknesh Koviata from the Asian Film Archive is a programmer and project coordinator. Hi, Viknesh. Welcome to this space.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Mariam Tafakori, Director of Iranian BAC, that is part of the East program. She's based in Shiraz and London, and her work is interested in fictions of non-fiction. Her broader research explores plural subjectivities, the self-other binary, as well as distinctions and absence, erasure, secrecy, untouchable, and unspoken prohibitions. Welcome to this space, Maria.
Thank you.
And finally, our guest, Riyad Rizaldi. He is the director of Ghost Like Us. Riyad works as an artist and amateur researcher. He's born in Indonesia and currently based in Hong Kong. His main focus is in the relationship between capital and technology, extractivism, and theoretical fiction. Through his works, he questions the notion of image politics, materiality, media archaeology, and anticipated consequences of technologies. Welcome, Riyad, to this space.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm going to start with a very broad question. I want to start talking about the origin of the program. before pandemics, we were already starting to think about the relationships between technology and cinema, about the meaning of creation and future of art in a world that was already on a crisis. How was your creative process within this program? Maybe we can start with Vignesh, that was from the beginning in the design of this.
Sure. Well, the project really started because when the pandemic was really at its sort of peak at our part of the world in May, our cinemas were shut down. Film production everywhere was on a halt, and we were just thinking, how can we still program if we don't have a cinema? And then we thought to ourselves, there are also filmmakers and writers that they're all around the world that must also be sort of thinking the same thing, like how do we produce without these means of production being available to us. So it really started off as a way of connecting with community and to seeing how we can provide a platform for people to produce content without needing to go out and shoot something that people can do just with a screen, a laptop, anywhere they are in the world, wherever they are in lockdown, to be able to conveniently produce something. And also the other desire was to create a repository of critical thinking, which in the form of video essay. The format is something that many people have been very familiar with on YouTube. There are many video essays out there, but in terms of content that was produced dedicated to Asian cinema, we felt it was quite lacking. So we felt this was an area that we could go into, that where we can produce this repository of information. And now that we've done our first edition, which has kind of been quite successful to some extent, it's very encouraging for us to do many more editions of it in the years to come as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Riyad or Mariam?
Sorry, what was the question? So it was about how we started the project.
Yeah, and if you can talk to us about your creative process.
It was one of the essay film that I made. Irani Bag was one of the few essay films that I've got, actually, and I got an invitation from Asian Film Archive to submit basically a proposal, and it was, if I remember, it was right at the start of the pandemic, and I was already kind of working on a project, because I've just before the pandemic, in the last year, so that's 2 years now, can't believe 2 years gone, I've been starting to kind of really find the essay film as a form quite liberating. I shoot most of my films in Iran, and I often come back with a crazy amount of footage. I stay there for a long time, like I sometimes stay 1 or 2 years there, and then I return. And when I get stuck in a project, which happens often, I started different projects, and essay films have been the projects I've always started when I was stuck with the films that I've shot myself. And using archive has given me so much kind of room in terms of what I could do when I can't go out, or what I could do when I'm not back home, what I could do, et cetera, and of course pandemic just added another layer of not being able to go out, and what it means to be stuck in a cubicle, and not being able to kind of communicate with people physically, which for some of us been really difficult, but also how a film can kind of help us to connect again with the outside that we physically are completely impossible. It has been in the last year, so that kind of felt like a good project to get into, and then there was the whole concept of Irani Bag, which was about touching, and I started the project before the whole pandemic. It had nothing to do with the pandemic, I was interested in how this whole kind of lack of touch in Iranian cinema is not really known even by a lot of non-Iranian film scholars who Iranian film scholars, even the people who know about Iranian cinema but didn't know about this kind of lack of touch between or the prohibition of touch between performers and more broadly, about this whole kind of about a codified language, how we kind of communicate within the cinematic language, and how culturally specific it is. Like there are all these unspoken contracts and codes that we agree. Like every Iranian knows sometimes, what some of these objects are stand-ins for. What are they kind of signifying? What do they mean? What are they trying to communicate that we can't perhaps see, or the actors can't really do, etc. But that language that we don't really kind of communicate, but we know, we feel it, we get it, we just know it, is completely inaccessible to anyone who doesn't have that background, who wasn't brought up in that culture. You can be an Iranian who was born outside Iran and still not have access to that language. I was really interested in this in this kind of so many different languages that we kind of communicate in film, right? And in a lot of my work, I try to kind of bring more focus into these kind of whether they are objects or words and languages that we don't have access to. So I refuse to translate things because ultimately some of these things are not translatable. And so yeah, that's kind of a very kind of broad overview.
Yes, in a matter of way, the desire has been erased. Not only woman desire has been erased, not only in Iranian cinema but in worldwide cinema. So
absolutely,
frontiers kind of are very thin in that aspect.
Absolutely.
Riyad?
Yeah, I guess in terms of the project, it's pretty similar with Mariam. It's the Asian Film Archive invited me to propose a proposal or to submit a proposal. At the time, I was currently editing my other works, but there's an idea that I have been thinking a lot for such a long time, which is the actually what is not what, but more like where and when is cinema is. And that's the idea that I have been thinking a lot because growing up in the suburb, not suburb actually, rural area in Indonesia, like my encounters with cinema is actually like today situation in COVID, basically at home, with VCDs. I'm not sure if VCDs it's big in Colombia, but it's similar to before DVDs. There was VCDs, but before there was VHS and Betamax, and stuff like that, right? So I have this idea of questioning what is cinema and when and where is cinema, because there's a lot of films made by people who are not linked into industry, film industry in Indonesia, and then basically like rural people try to make films just for themselves. And that's the starting point of this project, Goes Like Us. But what's the other thing that makes me curious about it is to actually digging the genealogy, like why this happened, why this kind of film could happen. And that's the basic idea why I started to explore and investigate the trajectory of Indonesian horror cinema and how it links to like the centralizations of power and also like the military regime as well as propaganda. But in the end, there's also a questions about the media itself, like the decentralization of technology allowed these people, especially like rural people, to create their own arts. And their own arts definitely have a different kind of like approach to like the arts from the film industry. And this kind of approach that I find it like really fascinating. For example, like this, the films that I dissect and I investigate is the films that not necessarily an entertainment one, but also like more have this strange and almost spiritual approach to it. You know, to see a film or the technology behind the cinema as some sort of kind of like travel to the another world, and this kind of like, you know, entanglement of different kind of like aspect eventually inform my work for the commission for the AFA. But yeah, but the starting point is the questioning when and where is cinema, based on my experience when I was a kid watching films, mostly horror films at home, and try to figure it out, like what's the meaning of cinema. From the technology, also from the culture of it.
Yes, and I want to ask you about precisely that you're talking about. Here is the relation between film and politics and the decentralization of technology and power and cinema that we can see not only in your video essay but in many video essays through this program. And the question is, monographs also break with the limits of geography and gender, and many films talk about personal issues and intimate spaces, which is very related to politics. Can you talk about this approach in your works and why it's so important to talk about the relationship between arts and politics during pandemic times? As directors and Vignesh as a programmer.
So me, okay. From my perspective, it's I think it's not only, well, most of my work is always dealt with power, and then how, for example, like how reality is construct, not only especially in Indonesia. My subject is always everything that happens in Indonesia is always constructed by the people who are control the reality or control the reality of Indonesia, you know, like all the politics or like economy and social whatsoever. And yeah, throughout my works, I always try to investigate that and why this happened, and then what's the reason or the genealogy of that. And I think in terms of like the relation between art and politics, that the art itself is the vessel for me to explore this idea of the relation of power. And especially I'm really interested in how the technology, especially technology of cinema, but not only cinema, also like radio and whatsoever, is used to control, or not control, but is used to kind of like some sort of an extension of power, and how to mobilize that power to think or speculatively thinking if that power's decentralized or mobilized for people who have less power. So that's, I guess, in terms of like Ghosts Like Us, it's also like the way that I'm trying to talk about it. Like, what if this power of cinema is actually, owned by these people in the rural area, when they have their own cosmology, they have their own thinking, they have their own idea of what is cinema, and then to see that from the perspective not only like politics but also aesthetics, like how they create their own language, aesthetic language, because the people, for example, like Indonesian cinema, have this kind of like construction of Indonesian cinema language, like people there's always this sense of identity, Indonesian identity, that is forced by the regime or the government to kind of like show internationally this is like Indonesian cinema. But for the rural people, or like people who don't have this power, they see it differently, and they want to kind of like express it with like a different kind of language, aesthetic language. And that's something that I'm really interested in seeing. And also like who owns this term of cinema as well, like who defined this the idea of cinema. And that's also something that I somehow explore as part of this kind of like a politics of cinema and politics of art. I'm not sure if it's related to the pandemic, but I guess pandemic makes me think harder about this because I have so much time just at home and you know, like geeking out about this relation, the power relation.
And the relationship with non-linear cinema, that is the cinema that you both are making. Mariam or Vignesh, you want to talk about the relationship between art and politics in your work?
Yes, Mariam, you can go ahead first, yeah.
About the relationship between art and politics, if you want to expand your thoughts on Vignesh and Mariam.
Just to say something, sorry, before I cut off, I was going to say something in response to what Ria said about having a community. I mean, it could be anywhere, but having a community kind of develop their own language that whether it's aesthetic, whether it's, you know, political, etc., is also what I'm really interested in, not only about, you know, how one community somewhere does that, but also about how countries, well, let's say third world countries, when they try to kind of fit in to the more mainstream Western cinemas and festivals, they always have to kind of they know what they want, and they try to kind of produce and fit into the narratives that the Western festivals are looking into and are expecting from, you know, countries like Iran or Saudi Arabia, etc. You know, it's or in general in Middle East. So there's this narrative of festivals always taking on films that are about pain and poverty and misery and politics and political prisoners, etc. And that kind of brings in a sort of you know, creates another cinema of that is not an internal cinema, that's got nothing to do with the Iranian cinema, let's say, but it's the Iranian cinema made and tailored for the West. And that means that there's an internal cinema that outside Iran is completely unknown. Just like what Ria was saying about, you know, there is this community, they have their own language, they've got their own cinema, they have their own idea of what cinematic or aesthetic language should be, etc. They don't have to fit in any of those kind of big budget industries, etc. And there is all these kind of there are all these cinemas or languages that are unknown very often. I remember I was doing a talk a few years ago, and I was talking about underground cinema, and people were asking me like, so where are these places? And I'm like, well, if I tell you, they'll disappear tomorrow, you know. So it's the whole kind of relationship between political filmmaking and politics and not just cinema, but media in general. Anything that kind of is addressing a large audience, is that it's always a kind of very slippery area. Like there's a lot of things that I could say now that I wouldn't, because I go back home, you know. So it's this whole censorship has so many layers. You know, I'm constantly self-censoring myself because I know what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to say. Just because I live here doesn't mean that, you know, I can just happily say whatever I want. I obviously go back and live there too. But I just find as much as, you know, we all know that let's face it, censorship is horrible, it's ugly, it's people die and get tortured for these things. But there are so many levels. There's an everyday level of, you know, how artists are working within the boundaries, within, you know, there are people still working, even though that there are all these kind of, you know, limitations and prohibitions and everything. Just like, you know, what I kind of try to deal with in Irani bags, but on a very kind of small scale, one tiny part of this whole kind of, you know, a huge area of the objects and languages, and kind of a small tiny prohibition that is so overcome in a way that kind of reverses the prohibition, you know. And that's what I'm interested in. I'm really interested in how prohibition doesn't really prohibit, but actually becomes a sort of productive site for what is being prohibited. So it's a kind of twisted and a strange kind of contradictory thing. But anyone who kind of has lived or lives right now in any sort of complex political situations in their country, they know how sometimes prohibition can be productive in strange ways, and how sometimes, you know, very kind of mundane and boring events become very interesting just because of what's being kind of how they are manipulated and how they are prohibited, etc. I don't think it's a very new thing. Everyone can kind of can understand that in a way.
Thank you, Mariam. Vignesh?
Yeah, just actually just to quickly sort of respond to Ria. I was watching Adam Curtis's new documentary series recently called "Can't Get You Out of My Head," and it really really reminded me of what you know, your work, how your work made me feel as well when I was watching, just in terms of recognizing the patterns of power, you know, recognizing patterns within images and putting them together. In a sense, you know, Mariam's film is also in that sense, like looking at patterns, putting them together in an essayistic fashion. And yeah, just talking about power and how that also links to how we talk about cinema or how we think about cinema. These were some of the things that motivated us to come up with Monographs. When we look at how you know, what is defined as of Asian cinema, which you know, has certain problematic boundaries, we often find, you know, a certain canon building exercise, right, that is enforced and reinforced with, you know, your endless best 100 films of the year, best 20 Asian films of the year. It's always by the same institutions, and then it's always sort of copied and reposted and so on. So there is an accepted boundary of what Asian cinema is and how we talk about Asian cinema. And as an institution, I would like to believe that the Asian Film Archive would like to, in a sense, challenge this canon building exercise, try to disrupt it. So when we approach people like the people that we've approached, and we hear back the kind of proposals that were being that were given to us, we really saw a desire to challenge these canons, and also to open up and excavate areas of Asian cinema, moving image, or visual culture that perhaps many of us may not have encountered. And this is the kind of platform that, as an institution, we hope that we were trying to build with Monographs. So yeah, when we talk about art and politics, I wouldn't say that Monographs started as a political project in a sense. We can really think of it as an open canvas, and an opportunity for people to come and collaborate with us. It is really amazing to see that the artists and filmmakers that we approached felt that they could speak freely and explore things, issues that they're passionate about and they connect deeply with. So, you know, of course, Ria and Mariam's work, but we also have Oka from Myanmar, who also, you know, he unfortunately couldn't join us tonight, but you know, he also uses his own personal memories, his connections with his own family history as filmmakers, and also talks about how that's connected to censorship and politics. So we see these many different lines of inspiration coming in, and yeah, that's really the role that I see the AFA playing in this, as an enabler, as a platform builder. Yeah.
and a builder for dialogue, right? Like to dialogue about what film and what's and to break those patterns that you are mentioning. I want to ask about the reception of the audience of your films. What has been the reaction? What debates have emerged from this program and from your film?
It's really difficult to see the audience now. I don't know if any of us have been back. I for one haven't been back to cinema since the pandemic started. But it's nice to get to still get messages from people. Actually, very recently I got a message from a friend of mine who sent a photo of him in the cinema watching the film, and I was like, that is as close as I got to cinema. Thank you. And so it's definitely one thing it's probably the only thing I extremely miss right now, is not being able to kind of have a direct contact with the audience in the cinema and really kind of talk about, because it's what I mean, for those who know me, I re-edit my films forever. My films never finish, and I'm constantly kind of, still re-editing films I've made like 5 years ago. And what really kind of prompts those edits and those changes for me are what I hear from people, and what I hear when I go to festivals and talk to people. And that's I certainly missed this year. I just got very few messages from people who watched the film and sent kind comments. But sadly, it's gone with the pandemic at the moment.
Yes, as in my case, it was quite interesting because the only reaction that I really want to know is the filmmakers that make that films that I dissect. So I actually try to tracking them down, but it's really hard because they don't have any kind of like context and whatsoever. Because I really want to send the films and then let them see what they think about it. But I'm still trying to do that, and I hope so. I hope I can get to know them better, because I only know them from VCDs in my, I don't know, when I was teenagers, and then through internet eventually, but I'd never know or talk with them. So I really want to know their reaction to it. But yeah, apart from that, some friends message me about these films when they see it. And that's all about it. I don't get any kind of like other reaction. I hope the reaction is good.
Yes,
the Asian Film Archive will tell. We have a better idea of your.
Yeah, well, I mean, interestingly, this project was never was always intended for the internet. That was how we always started it. And I think Ria and Mariam will also know that when we first proposed this, the idea was that these works are created by a certain date, and then we just sort of post all of them online. The idea to really make the films travel was proposed to us by our project consultant Kevin B. Lee. He had a look at it. He worked very closely with everyone, and he's the one who really told us, "Hey, you guys got something here. You can send this out to festivals." It never crossed our minds. So we was like, we have nothing to lose, so we just sort of sent it out, and it got picked up. So the first premiere actually was a digital premiere at the Dharamshala Film Festival. But we're also very happy that we got to do a physical screening here in Singapore as well, for the Singapore International Film Festival. So that was nice because we got to go down and introduce the film personally to audiences, and also to stay around and talk to them after. So that was a really nice feeling. So yeah, to think of how, and now it's screened in Japan last week at the Yebisu Festival. And next in the upcoming weeks, it'll be screening in Bogota, both theatrically and also online. So yeah, it's something that we never expected, and now it's sort of taken a life of its own, and we're just very happy that it's out there and people are talking about it, and we've been getting some really nice feedback as well. So yeah.
Yeah, for us it's very exciting to have this program, because we never have access to Asian cinema, not even to mainstream cinema. So it's very interesting for us to have like a different perspective that it's not so different at all. There are many directors and artists working here in terms of decolonizing image and decolonizing also film structures. So I want to ask, just to close our conversation, if you want to talk about your future projects, or what do you think it's the future of cinema, or if we are in the future of cinema right now, what are your further projects, just for us to be looking forward for it?
The thing is that things are so uncertain at the moment, just at the kind of living level, that I don't even think about like what the future holds for cinema. Like, I think many artists right now are struggling so much, you know, just financially, but also finding ways and means to just carry on working. And it's been a really difficult year on, you know, so many levels. And I think as much as there's been a lot of kind of difficulty, but I see a lot of hope as well. And I hope, the only thing that I really hope for the future of cinema is that we can go back to the screen rooms and we can sit next to each other again. That's all I hope for the future of the cinema. But yes, apart from that, I hope all of us can still carry on making work, because things are just getting more and more complex for artists. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, the questions of the future of cinema is really tough for me, because I haven't even finished with the present of cinema, and that's something that never crossed to my mind, or the questions that I never try to answer the future of cinema, because I try to answer the present of cinemas, mostly in my work as well, like all of the, you know, anything, the cultural or whatever behind the cinemas today. It's also like a big questions to me. But yeah, I guess similar to Mariam, I just hope that the future is not really bleak or like dark as it seems to be. Try to keep optimistic, I guess. And in terms of future project, yeah, I'm currently developing a features films. Not sure, but yeah, financing is always really hard. So now doing a financing, and yeah, I also have another short film currently circuit in the festival, traveling in the festivals.
Well, I mean, speaking from the perspective of here in Singapore, where I would say the pandemic has been it's rather under control. It's been so for a few months. We're just playing it extra safe here, you know. So in terms of restrictions outside and wearing masks, it's enforced, and people have been participating in this sort of behavior. So our cinema, it used to seat, it originally sat 134 people, and now we can seat about less than half of that. But we're working with that, and what we've been noticing actually is a renewed interest in coming out to the cinema. Mainly because we can't travel. So it's really nice to have people coming out and being interested and curious about things we do. In the sort of cinema scene in Singapore, the Asian Film Archive is sort of relatively lesser known. We're a cultural institution, so we're not really quite an independent cinema, neither are we a commercial space. So for people to find out about us was really more of a word of mouth thing. But because of the pandemic, because of people are just looking out for ways to engage and connect, we really see a slight surge in interest. And if that is an indication of a brighter sort of future for cinephilia, then there is hopefully a trend that carries on, and that would make of course, all of us who work in cinema are very happy. So yeah, right now we're just planning for upcoming programs, and we are in the early stages of trying to figure out how we want to do a second edition of Monographs, which we would try to get the open call out there over the next few months. We're still in very, very early stages, so I can't really say anything. But for the first edition of Monographs, we tried to make the canvas really open and wide. But we are toying with the idea of working with a certain theme or certain frame or structure that people can respond to, but still keeping it quite open. So yeah, that's the semblance of some sort of future plans for us.
Thank you very much. I think this program is also hope for us to have it at the Cinemateca, at a physical space, but also in our virtual cinema. So I invite all our audience to be part of it. It's a very special program, and thank you so much for being part of it. I will keep you posted about the reactions of the audience at the venue, and I hope you take care, and I'm looking forward to your future projects.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Y grita fuego, manténlo prendido, fuego, no lo dejes apagar y grita fuego, manténlo prendido, fuego, no lo dejes apagar, vaya.